Hi everyone, I want to take a moment to talk about my Sentry cluster arrow build that I've been using to farm a lot of Paragons with in Season 25. So I started this with 1,000 keys in my pocket at Paragon 1800 and now they're empty, and I decided to talk a little about my findings. So this is a cluster arrow Sentry build. This is the freshly buffed Marauder. I already made like a guide for it, but I keep receiving a lot of questions about different choices I make and which is better and all these kind of things. So I want to talk a bit about it now that I have more gameplay experience with it. So most of the time I've been blasting something like GR120 all the way up to GR125 in somewhere between like 2 to 3 minutes. The average here for me at like 122 with like a well-geared character is maybe something like 240 or so. So occasionally I have a run that's about 3 minutes, and sometimes I have a run maybe like sub 2 minutes, but it's not that common unless you get a really good rift. So I'm playing the cold cluster arrow here right now, which is very powerful, and it doesn't really matter which rune you choose. So there's a physical with the rockets, there's a cold with the rockets, and then there's the loaded for bear, which is the pushing rune, but it also works well in speed farming. The main reason why I'm blasting with cold now is because I have frostburn in the cube in the armor slot, so I have no defensive item. And this makes the build super squishy, which obviously is a bit yikes on hardcore, but it does work for me, and most of the time I'm fine. I do proc here and there, so I gotta be a bit careful with this, because especially when Vengeance is down, you have like no defense, and with the Essence of Anguish included, you take extra damage. With 10 squirt stacks, you take extra damage again. So basically almost everything one-shots me when that happens. So I gotta be a bit careful, but the damage is really nice, the pace is really nice, as you can see, and my XP per hour is probably somewhere in like the 3.5 trillion range or so. I've also played a bit with Shadow's Impale, as you might have seen from my recent upload, where I did like this 121 in 96 seconds. So I've just played this for like 1.5 days. And I think they are very similar. The Impale is also extremely squishy with the setup I was playing, but it definitely has a lot of like potential to farm good XP. It's not exactly on the Monk's level, but I would say this is maybe something like 30% or so behind in terms of XP per hour. So still fairly solid, and probably like almost the next in line after the Monk, maybe excluding the Rough-Run Necromancer or so, though there are some other builds that probably perform at roughly the same level. For Gaudy Age, I haven't tried it on the live server yet, but I did try it on the PTR, and there it also seemed like it would be somewhere around the same level as Impale and Marauders, and they are all like just very similar in terms of their efficiency this season. So it's really cool, you can actually choose which build to play. And for Marauder in particular, you can also choose to play multi-shot or cluster arrow. So let's go over my in-game setup that I've actually been using for all these runs. So here's the Marauder set. I rolled a lot of cooldown reduction, sentry damage, there's a bit of resource cost reduction. Then we have the cluster arrow rolls. We have the Bombardier's Rucksack with the cluster arrow damage and the sentry damage. And we have the Yang's V-Curve. So even though this is not the multi-shot version of the build, you run this bow because of the resource cost reduction, which allows you to just like blast all the time. You don't have to worry about anything. Gives you also discipline resource cost reduction, so you can spam smoke screen all the time. Essentially, you press smoke screen on cooldown and you don't even lose resources here. As you can see, you can literally like even macro this if you like, and you will have this for the entire run, so to say. So this is extremely powerful. Lots of cooldown reduction helps you with standing up the sentries in every corner, and also giving you more vengeance. So I quite recently swapped to a lot more cooldown, because I previously had like augmented dexterity rings, nothing really crazy, but even non-ancient cooldown rings seem to be a bit better because you have more sentries out at all times, and those are what are dealing the most damage. So you definitely want to go for lots of cooldown here. In the cube there's the Manticore, there's the Frostburn and the Ring of Royal Grandeur. So you need the weapon, you need the ring, and the armor slot. As I said, the Frostburn is very greedy. You do get a bit of like defensive value from this freeze effect, but it's not really that crazy. So you mostly have to make sure you don't get hit. So smoke screen helps, and obviously maybe putting some vitality helps. But for the most part, I would recommend to just play either St. Arduous to protect your squirts and give you some toughness, or play Zoe's Secret, which just is like the standard choice, I guess. That also gives you a lot more toughness, because this setup is very squishy. You need to be very careful. You can definitely do some small like tweaks to the setup. For example, you could include something like Blood Vengeance, and then you could go with Displacement on smoke screen if you like. to get a bit more speed here, or I was even running hot pursuit for a while. I was running ambush a little bit, I was running steady aim for a little bit. So obviously you don't need the ballistics passive if you run with the fire cluster arrow, because it doesn't have rockets. So this can be swapped out for a few things and you can try to go even faster. But it will mainly come down to your cooldown management with the sentries. You have to set them up in the right spot because they need to have a line of sight to actually hit the targets. But the idea is that you can change the setup around a little bit and it will still remain at roughly the same efficiency, even going with the multi-shot arsenal here. So here obviously you rely even more on cooldown reduction because you don't have infinite range like the cluster arrows do, and you have to actually set up new sentries everywhere. But I've been running a bit of multi-shot, it felt the same to me, so it's kind of like a preference thing. One important thing about the weapon here is that I rolled this to poison damage, which is needed to proc the Essence of Anguish. So typically this build is played with Dregs of Lies, which is like the pet shard, and this has overall probably slightly more DPS, but here we have the extra movement speed and we have the extra cooldown reduction, which helps us with vengeance uptime, with putting up more sentries, and you also have this 50% poison damage effect, and this will only proc if you have poison damage on your own weapon or you use a poison skill, which a demon hunter doesn't have access to. So you need to roll the weapon to poison if it doesn't have it, and like this you can proc the shard. Otherwise, also to gain back a bit of extra toughness, you can just drop the Essence of Anguish and go with the Dregs of Lies again. This will be, as I said, roughly similar damage, but you lose a bit of like this utility and the speed, and it will probably be much more playable and much easier to do. If you want to see the full written guide for this build, you can also go check out the Marauder Sentry guide that I have spent many hours rewriting for the season. So here, like more details are explained. There's a soul shard section. Here are the different variants for T16, cluster arrow, multi-shot, whatever you want to read up on, and a bit more like in-depth explanations. I also have the video here that you can watch for like a full guide for like more of the different variants, but I figured it was worth highlighting the actual setup that I have been playing recently because it's a bit different from the guide, because I do not really recommend like such a super squishy glass cannon setup, especially if you're playing hardcore, but this is how we roll here. So that's already it for the update of my character on this build. I am currently preparing to push GR120 with this on hardcore. I'll probably do that quite soon. My initial goal was to go for 3000 Paragons, but I might actually not need that much, so stay tuned for that to happen quite soon. So hope you enjoyed this little video here, and wish you good luck with your Demon Hunter in Season 25, and see you guys next time.